What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Talking Halos. I'm your host today, Jared Timms, and I'm joined alongside my co-host, my partner in crime, Nate Green. Nate, oh man, I'm excited for this one. Forget about you for a second. We are joined by Lance. Just tell everybody what you do. I got to say your last name too, Lance
Say it.
Brozdowski. I
That's
think
beautiful.
I got it right
All
there.
right,
Spot
not
on.
bad.
All right, Lance, tell us what you do, and also, where we can find you, where we can find your work, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, right on. So I'm a player development analyst, and I'm also like kind of a multimedia producer with the Chicago Cubs regional sports network, known as Marquee Sports Network. I come from kind of a weird background. I was an accounting major in undergrad, and eventually pivoted out and went to journalism school at Northwestern. And I did some video editing for Driveline Baseball. That's kind of one thing that I think has definitely connected me to a lot of people in baseball that are currently in major league positions and stuff. Most notably on the Angels, Bill Hazel was actually the individual who hired me at Driveline. And he's now your guys' assistant pitching coach. One of the best dudes I've ever met. He's taught me so much about the sport and pitching and stuff. So it's just been, he's just a great dude. I'm so happy for him. But yeah, I'm a nerd. I'm a huge nerd. I think the key thing though is just trying to reduce some of it down to a digestible form. That's always been kind of my goal, is to, I think in the past I always had the idea of like, I want to turn people like, how do I say this? Change their minds. That's what I'm searching for. Change their minds. Like they believe something, I want to turn that into something else, turn that into something that I think is maybe a little bit sharper. But as I've been in this industry a little bit, I think I've realized that I just want to like present the other side of the argument, if that makes any sense, and like leave it up to you as to whether you want to make that decision. So I find my job is just more so presenting the other side, or presenting an angle that might be a little different than something that's, anecdotally believed or something like that. But it's been a wild ride, and I'm hoping it kind of keeps going from here.
And I absolutely love your work. And the reason why, we wanted to get you on, you had a fantastic video about Reid Detmers and his slider breakdown and a bunch of other things as well. So, I mean, where can people find, your Twitter, the YouTube? That's like, I've been going through the YouTube now, and it's a lot of fun to go through it now.
Yeah, the YouTube was a bit of like a passion project that I now try to push a little bit more. It was basically like a way for me to get reps trying to explain things. So it was almost more of just my own personal thing. Like I didn't even really care too much about engagement, I would say. Like it doesn't have a ton of engagement, but it's just like, it's something I could just sit down and like, I'm trying to think through and talk through something. It allows me to do so. And I get content out of it to some extent, but I'm permanently on Twitter, Lance BROZ, just the first four letters of my last name. And the YouTube account is, I think, the same. You just search Lance BROZ. I imagine I'll come up. I'm on Marquee, and I hopefully will be able to expand the repertoire to some other networks this year, but that's kind of still in the works. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys are not following him, go do that right now. I'll also drop it because we do it YouTube as well, because we want to do the exact same thing. We want to explain stuff. So I'll drop it in, the description below. So with that being said, Nate, I'm going to forget about you some more because I want to get this rolling here, and everybody knows how you're doing. You're Negative Nate.
Negative Nate.
The fans don't like that name anymore,
No, the fans are actually getting upset with that name. So we're going to have to stop calling you
because
Nate.
It's realistic is what it is, but keep going.
All right. I got a question here for you guys. I didn't tell you before we started, but it's huge controversy right now. People are making too big of a deal about it. I think you guys kind of know where I'm going with this. Lance, I'll start with you. Edwin Diaz got hurt in the World Baseball Classic. I want to know your thoughts on the World Baseball Classic. Like, it's not a waste of time. Tell me it's not a waste of time.
Of course not. Come on, man. It's like the easiest question. That was a layup. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, you just hear the guys talking about it. Like, whether, an individual who is a fan of a certain team loses a player, like, you have to accept that risk, right? Like, it just is what it is. Like, these guys love doing it. The passion they play with is incredible. Like, the amount of fans that are attending these games, it's unbelievable. It's like a cultural event more so than a pure baseball game. I see no issue with it at all.
I'm in full agreement. Nate, I believe you're in full agreement, but go ahead, give your thoughts.
Yeah.
You hate that Edwin Diaz got hurt?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you never want to see injuries. Nobody roots for injuries ever. But you've heard it from the Dominican team before the game. Like, most of their guys are saying they'd rather win the World Baseball Classic than win a World Series. Like, it is that important to them and their country. So, of course, I would love to keep this thing going. What people forget about, Gavin Lux got hurt in spring training. We're getting rid of spring training because he tore his ACL there. Paul George, he missed an entire year because he got hurt in a Team USA practice, not even a game. So, like, they still play basketball for the U.S. and things like that. So I think people are just overreacting because it's a guy on a big market team, and he just got a big contract, so people are going to freak out about it. I think if this was a prospect that not too many people knew about, that nobody'd be saying anything.
Yep, I agree with both of you guys. I think I was at the Adam Jones catch. That was the most electrifying game that I think I've ever been at. And then, you know,
It's awesome.
it was unbelievable. And then the Stanton home run, it was, like I said, one of the coolest things. And not just coming from an Angels fan who hasn't been to the playoffs all that much lately. Just from a baseball perspective, it was one of the most unbelievable games I've ever been to. And I think those who are, you know, talking bad about the World Baseball Classic just haven't been to a game. And probably should get out to a game because it is unbelievable. So with that being said, love all those answers. We're here to talk a little bit of Reid Detmers. Lance, you had the fantastic video that sparked a lot of interest with a lot of people, actually. You have Reid Detmers as one of your breakout players of the year in this 2023 campaign. If you talk to Angels fans, he probably broke out last year. But
Yeah,
to say he would break out more, I wouldn't surprise any of us. Why is this? You think he's going to be a breakout player this year?
Yeah. So I will say the breakout term might have been a little buzzy purely to get some engagement there, but he did have a great season last year. And look at some of the peripherals. You should look at like a simple ERA to FIP comparison, like or xFIP more so, where it's standardizing a home run rate. Like he maybe overperformed a little bit, but you also see a lot of guys, especially lefties, I think for the most part, because a lot of the deception angles, the angles they create to righties, can kind of outperform those consistently. I think a little bit more. I really like the slider. I think it, in the land of sweepers that we've seen, where you're talking about a pitch that's lateral. The Ohtani throws one. There you go. It's a great example. 80s. His is really hard. His is like 87. He gets up to like sometimes 20 inches of horizontal on that thing. His is a bit of a unicorn in terms of how much movement he gets for the velocity it's at. But generally, you're thinking about that sweeper between like 82 to 84, anywhere around 13 plus horizontal. So breaking away from a righty if you're a right-handed pitcher. And that's kind of taken over baseball. I'd say almost more so it's maybe more of a reliever weapon, but there are some guys who throw it in starting rotations. Ohtani being one. You think of like Drew Rasmussen on the Rays is another. But you're also seeing, I think, a contrast. Whenever something happens trend-wise in a sport, I think there's often a pullback. And I think I initially saw a lot of people on Twitter and stuff pointing out how like gyro sliders, which are basically sliders that don't have as much lateral movement. So if you watch them in a game, they're not breaking a lot right to left. They're kind of just dropping. It's spinning like a bullet. That's the simplest way to think about it, is a bullet. And one of the more unusual concepts that not unusual, but one of the concepts that I always like going back to is if you think about like the rifling of a bullet out of a barrel stabilizes the flight. That's why it was so important as like an innovation in world history. The gyro ball is the same idea. So the concept there is that it's maybe a little bit easier to command. If we think that things are thrown harder and have more movement or harder to command, then sweepers are tough to command. Zone rate on those, how often pitchers get them in the zone, is somewhere around like 40%, I think, at the major league level. You see variations of that up to 50 and some below, where it barely even becomes a usable pitch, in my opinion. Gyro sliders, I think, are probably make up the bin. That's maybe 45% around there. So you'll generally see those thrown in the zone more consistently. Guys are able to command them. Generally, that's because the pitch doesn't have a lot of what you'd call spin-induced movement. The key for it, though, is it's got to be thrown hard. And the damage on this pitch when it's over the plate is generally much more debilitating for a starting pitcher than what is created via a sweeper. Sweepers are just kind of hard to barrel in general. But gyro sliders, when they're missed, say arm side, trying to throw that down away from a righty, you miss arm side on, it comes up into the zone. Like that, the slug on that pitch really, really goes up. So maybe there's something ideally that's between a sweeper and a gyro slider. Maybe that's the next evolution, is teams to go towards that. But the gyro slider is an interesting pitch, and I often think it's really deceptive coming out of a lefty like Detmers' hands. And he last year had a lot of variation in the slider month to month. And the video, I kind of broke this down. It went from like kind of this weird downer curve, which was a variation off of the regular curve he threw, went to a full sweeper in May where it was like 82 with 10 plus horizontal. Then it kind of went back to a weird in between. And the main trend is just that it got harder and harder and harder. Got up to like 88 miles per hour average in September, right around there. And it kind of lost all that spin-induced movement and became this gyro ball, so to speak, this gyro slider, bullet slider, whatever you want to call it. And at 87, it's a really good pitch. Any model's really going to like that pitch. Though there's an old adage that like any slider above 85 is good. And if you're getting above 87, it's even better. My idea here in calling him a breakout was, I just think that projections are going to look at a full season rather than maybe last 2 months. And generally, I think that's a concept to believe in, right? Like the entirety of a season is probably more predictive in general than the final 5 starts of a guy's season, or final half of a, second half versus full season. I think full season is generally more predictive. But I think we're getting to the point now, Saris does a great job of this, The Athletic, where when you can see a deliberate pitch change, I think it's reason to kind of go away from what a projection is saying and taking the full aggregate of a season. And I think this is where you kind of get the advantage. It's almost like a little bit of a cheat code to just be like, oh yeah, he changed his slider. By the time he got to August, September, that pitch was very different. It's a much better pitch. And he was able to command it, created a lot of swing and miss, had a really good final 2 months of the season off these two pitches. And my guess here is that he's just going to try to throw it even harder. And knowing a little bit about how Bill Hazel works, the new assistant pitching coach for the Angels, I imagine he just wants him to throw that pitch harder. Velocity's king. If he can get that thing up to 89 plus, it just becomes an even better pitch. And I think that pitch over the course of a full season will allow him to kind of repeat the 3.77 he had. I went a little aggressive and said he'd beat it and maybe be like 3.5, sub 3.5 ERA. But I really like the idea of strikeouts jumping a little bit. I think this is a pitch he'd be able to control. So maybe he's not going to end up like a Patrick Sandoval where he walks a lot of guys and such. But I just really like him as a pitcher. I think that this is just one of those things where you are looking at a deliberate change rather than just pulling the full season and building a projection off of that. But yeah, these gyro sliders are fun. You got to throw them hard. He throws it really hard. If this thing can get up to like 90 plus, like it's a nasty, nasty pitch.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah,
I promise I take it all in. I know Nate. No, I know Nate's taking it all in.
No, I think that was great, and
I love it.
Just wanted to add a couple things. One,
let's do it.
I don't think the breakout word is uncalled for here. I think he took the first step in his development last year, and this is his breakout year. I think this is the year you see that next step forward. So I don't think that you were wrong in calling it a breakout year. And we have seen in spring training, it's up around 88, 89. Like it's been harder gyro slider. And I was going to ask, and you kind of already hit on this a little bit with Hazel. He likes this pitch a lot, and I think we saw a little bit out of Patrick Sandoval in the Mexico-USA game. Do you think this will be more of a tool for the Angel pitchers with Bill coming over?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't say it's something that Bill – I can't say I know much about how he operates, pitch-wise, like whether he prefers certain pitches. Generally, most pitching coaches I talk to, some of the ones that are more data-slanted, Bill's a very data-slanted coach. But he's also really good at just understanding players and such and understanding their strengths. I think most people generally, not specifying to Bill, would just say they would take a pitcher, let me see their base repertoire if they're a major league pitcher, give me a stuff model I believe in, so something that considers velocity, considers the shape of the pitch, maybe considers some very simple factors like release height and such, and let me work towards better offerings off what he has based on the stuff model I like. So maybe there's something about Detmers that he prefers this kind of gyro slider with as opposed to the sweeper. It could be a control thing. Maybe they're looking at other underlying stats from a hitter side of like, hey, actually this pitch isn't allowing as much damage over the plate when you miss with it. There could be a variety of variables there as to why maybe he prefers this. But I also think that Bill has built out, there's if you're a pitch design person, which he was the primary pro pitching guy over at Driveline, like you're probably working with a lot of pitchers. I'm sure he's giving guys sweepers all the time, and I'm sure he's giving guys gyro sliders where he thought it fit better. But I think it's, as any coach would tell you, they're trying to optimize that player's strength. So I don't necessarily know if it's a tool that you're going to see the Angels like throw at every pitcher now. They're just the gyro slider team. I'd say the Detmers is maybe more of a one-off case. It's also really hard to throw a gyro slider at 89. Like I think the Rays are a team in the minors that really like this pitch. There are not a lot of guys that get this pitch above 89, generally because you're getting to the side of the ball. You're creating bullet spin, as Jared was showing a little bit. That's kind of hard. Generally, you think of the concept of like, okay, when a pitch goes from a gyro slider to a cutter, it gets harder. Why does it get harder? Generally because you're getting behind the ball more, which allows you to impart a little bit more force and velocity on the ball. I might be getting some of those physics terms wrong, but that's generally how I think of it, right? Like behind the ball more, cutter, harder. So like when you're not behind the ball more, to throw at 89 plus is very difficult. And this is why it's not a pitch that I think a ton of guys throw. You'll see like the DeGrom style one that has a little bit of that backspin, cutter side, that's like 90. But to get like truly no inches of spin-induced vertical movement and no horizontal at 90 is really difficult. It's a very, very hard pitch to throw, and I think that's unique.
Yeah, absolutely. And like just kind of going back and almost dating myself a little bit, I remember like the craze of Daisuke Matsuzaka, and he threw the gyro ball at the time, and people thought it was a rise ball. Like at the time, it was. I remember that. And it was like everybody was trying to throw a gyro ball, and nobody knew what a gyro ball actually was. And now we're looking at it and like, yeah, and everybody knows about the gyro ball now, and everybody knows, about the sweeper. And I mean, I know when that craze started as well, because it was Adam Ottavino who's kind of started that thing, the that gyro type slider, and then it went on to like the Chaz Rowe type of thing. So I mean, it's fascinating to see the trends year in and year out. And I mean, Nate, you mentioned Patrick Sandoval. I think I could be wrong, and I know Baseball Savant's not the most ideal thing to look at, but you look at what he did with Team Mexico, what he did with Team Mexico, and he was almost throwing 2 sliders. He was throwing one with a lot less vertical, like the Detmers gyro ball, and he was throwing one that was a little bit more of a sweeper. And we saw him throwing it extremely hard, extremely hard.
Especially to
I actually
Trout,
didn't see this.
he was throwing it super hard to Trout.
Yes, he was. So I'm probably now going to start a new video here for you, Lance. So start.
Hold on. I'm gonna pull up some stuff. Keep talking.
I'll send you it right now because Jared sent it to me.
Yeah. I did it wasn't crazy, like, but I mean, you saw some spin increase, you saw some vertical break decrease, and you saw the horizontal go down a little bit too. It wasn't a crazy amount, but it was like he was almost. And Patrick Sandoval too. Like I always have to remind myself that Patrick Sandoval's delivery is an extremely, extremely volatile delivery and not a very repeatable delivery either. So that could definitely be part of it as well, with that side of stuff. So, I mean, honestly, Lance, you touched on everything that I wanted to touch on. I freaking love listening to this side of stuff. Give me, I mean, we mentioned it off the air here. We'll mention it on our recording. Do you have any comps for what Reid Detmers might be?
Yeah, this is funny. So in the video, I should have done. I hate so funny. I generally am always a stickler on comps because like most of the time, every pitcher is kind of an aggregation of other pitchers. So I shy away from being like this pitcher is like another pitcher. But it's funny when I pulled the comps for Reid based on the projection I gave him, which is a little more aggressive than what you're going to see from like a Steamer or wherever else you look on Fangraphs. I literally just sorted last year's pitchers based on comparable K9, whip, and strike ERA. Just basic. Just was like, all right, who is in this area of like 3.5 with a good maybe 9 to 10 K per 9 and reasonable 1-2 sub 1-2 whip. And I think Kershaw was there. So like, it's hilarious because I really don't want to compare Reid Detmers to Kershaw, but I get in the video, it was like, and it's funny, you brought it up here and I thought of it. And I was like, wow, I never realized the ramifications of saying that in kind of comping a pitcher, so to speak. I don't necessarily know. I guess you could go with like a Kershaw light, but I really don't like saying that. I know
it's not fair to Detmers to say that, but it is pretty close.
Yeah, but I'm also talking present day Kershaw too.
Yeah,
right? I'm not talking like Pete Kershaw. I'm talking like what is Kershaw doing right now? Obviously, we hope Reid gets more innings, etc. But yeah, I think, man, I don't really have a comp off the top of my head. I'll throw out another name because he's a similar guy who threw a similar pitch, but he's actually changed the shape of the pitch as I understand it. He's a Royal starter, Daniel Lynch, also a lefty, a little bit lower slot than Reid, but Daniel Lynch also threw like this gyro ball. He just didn't throw it hard. He threw like 83 to 85, and the thing got beat up. It sounds like he went to Tread Athletics, which is a facility in North Carolina that does really cool stuff, similar to Driveline in terms of some of the aspects of what they do. And his pitch is now like 88 to 90, but he's got what you'd call, I'd say almost more like a sluttery cutter where it's got backspin, which is allowing him to throw it harder. So his is now like Reid's is like maybe right around 0-0. So no spin-induced movement, laterally or vertically. Whereas Daniel Lynch's is now getting some cut and it has backspin. So his is like 88 and it's got like 6 inches induced vertical with like 4 inches glove side. That's a really interesting pitch. But those lefties that throw those kind of pitches, AJ Puck is another one. Actually, I think he throws kind of a gyro ball that the Marlins obviously really like to acquire him. There's a lot of these lefties that throw this kind of slingy slider where they get around the ball, but not a lot of them throw it as hard as Reid. I think that's the differentiator. So it's hard to come up with a comp, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you throw it, it's almost like, again, not to compare him to Shohei Ohtani, but it's almost that Shohei Ohtani thing. When you're unique like that, you throw a pitch that not a lot of people throw. It's hard to find somebody. And I appreciate the Clayton Kershaw comp.
The reason he says that though is because the big overhand hook like Kershaw had, and then Kershaw feels like, and he'll tell you this, like his next step of becoming like elite was when he figured out the slider. And it's not the same. Obviously, it's not the same slider as Detmers, but like that was the next pitch that went off a different plane because all he had was the fastball, the curveball, and the changeup, and then he added the slider, and it was like, oh boy, now he's got something on a different plane, and this is not fair.
Yeah, and Detmers, we've always said that about Detmers. It's like we're not worried about command. He's always had good command. We're not worried about the fastball, though it's ticked up this offseason.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's great.
96, 97.
Yeah, and then the big loopy curveball is a nice change of pace, get me over in a sense pitch, but it's going to be that slider and that changeup that make the difference for Reid Detmers. So, with that being said, Lance, I appreciate it. Nate, you got anything else for Lance? I mean, I could sit here and talk with Lance.
Yeah, we could do this all day. Honestly,
We'll have to sync up for another slot sometime and have it hop on.
Wait, okay. Well, when you get a Patrick Sandoval video out there, because I know,
yes.
I know I'm now sparking.
I got one on his changeup.
Oh, do you?
Did you see that one? Yeah.
I didn't see the change.
We can chat a little about that.
I'm gonna post that to my Twitter tonight for you, because I
go for it.
So I appreciate you jumping on. Let everybody know where they can find you, find your work, all that fun stuff, man.
Yeah, so primarily on Twitter, Lance BROZ. My YouTube is I think if you just search Lance and then any picture that I've covered, so Reid Detmers, it'd probably come up. Lance BROZ might come up there as well. And I'm also on Marquee Sports Network a lot as kind of player development analyst. I'll be doing some stuff on the broadcast this year, cover the Cubs minor leagues and stuff. So yeah, kind of a jack of all trades, and I'll hopefully be adding a couple more networks to my repertoire this year.
Absolutely, and with the MLB, everybody playing everybody now, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's fun
for you out there. So
thanks.
Yeah, with that being said, guys, thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day.